my husband and I first met, when we were both 22 years old, at his best friend's wedding. I instantly fell in love with him, and it seemed like he had some interest in me as well. The day after the wedding, we had our first date in the park, and our relationship quickly became intense. Felix was everything I ever wanted in a partner: smart, kind, good-looking, caring, strong, and fair. He was always there for me when I needed support, comforted me during tough times, and helped with my problems. He wasn't just my rock, he was my ideal man, and I loved him completely. After a year, we decided to move in together, and a year later, we got married. However, our marriage had its share of challenges. My husband was hard-working and shared household chores with me, but financial issues began to strain our young family, leading to occasional conflicts. During one of our fights, I left home for 2 weeks. Felix, who usually avoided confrontation, was slow to make amends, and my pride stopped me from reaching out first. I waited for him to make the first move. During that time, Felix's best friend Dima, who was also my friend, offered support when he saw how troubled I was. Our conversations turned passionate, leading to a night we spent together. I saw it as payback for Felix's indifference, but just 3 days later, Felix came to me with roses, apologized, and begged for my return. I realized my mistake, but it was too late. We reconciled and things got better. Then I discovered I was pregnant, and to my shock, the child was not Felix's, but Dimas. I struggled with this revelation, but it was too late. So the choice of whether to have the child or not was out of my hands. I gave birth to my son 6 months later, and I cried every night, regretting my foolishness and losing the love of my life. I knew I had to confess, but I couldn't bear to break Felix's heart. Throughout my pregnancy, he was overjoyed, proudly telling everyone about his beloved wife, giving him a son. His emotional moment at the maternity hospital, holding our child and calling him my son. My joy, my daddy's pride, is etched in my memory. I had planned to tell him the truth when our son was older, but that moment never came, and I continued to lie. 14 years passed and our family seemed harmonious. I buried my deceit because being a father means more than just biological ties. But as they say, secrets have a way of coming to light. One day, Felix found the unsent letters I had written to Dima. When I came home, he was standing in the dark holding those letters. It shattered my soul. He said nothing, and his eyes held no emotion. I cried, begged for forgiveness, and tried to explain, but he remained silent. In that silence, I realized the depth of my wrongdoing and was ready to face any consequences. Felix just moved away from the window, sat on the couch, and cried. Seeing this, I lost control and became hysterical. Sobbing uncontrollably, he left without a word, and I kept crying, realizing I had destroyed his life. My husband and I are both 38 years old, and our son Tom was at the center of our world. We had hoped for another child, but my health issues prevented it. Felix had dedicated his life to raising his best friend's child, his pride, and now he knows it's all a lie. That night, all I could think of was my terrible mistake. I wanted to die, but my love for our son stopped me. The next morning, Felix packed his things and left, ignoring my pleas to stay. It's been 2 months, and I'm still searching for a chance to beg for his forgiveness. I may be a fool, but I believe I have a chance, because Felix hasn't filed for divorce and still communicates with our son. Diamond only found out he was the father a year after the birth. I thought it wouldn't affect him, but to my surprise, he developed paternal feelings. He offered to raise our child because he and his wife had none, but I refused as I loved only Felix. Tom felt only friendly sympathy for his biological father, and I didn't want to disrupt his family. I begged Dima not to interfere, emphasizing my love for my husband, our son, and our family. Dima sent money as unofficial child support, but I refused. Eventually, he walked out of our lives, though he and Felix remained friends until the truth came out. As for the letters, I kept them out of sentimentality, but it ultimately cost me my family. My husband has always been a great man. After our first big fight, I made a foolish decision to stay with my brother. For 2 weeks, we had a good, friendly relationship. After the argument with Felix, we often talked on the phone. He tried to calm me down and convince me to return to my husband, but I was waiting for Felix to reach out, not his friend, and he stayed silent. One evening when my brother was out, Dima called and offered to come over, saying that these things happen in many families. At first, and I needed a distraction. I agreed, and without much thought, he came over. And then today, my son came home after spending the weekend with his father and mentioned they discussed the future of our family. I've been anxious all day, wondering what Felix told his son. If he's willing to come back, he wouldn't lie to our child except for that one time. I haven't cheated on my husband. In our 16 years together, it was my only mistake. My son doesn't know who his real father is, and hopefully he never will. He deeply loves Felix, trusts him, and is proud to have him as a father. Their bond is even stronger than the one he shares with me. If he found out the truth now, it would break his heart. In any case, a lot has changed this week. Last weekend, my son talked to Felix about the future of our family. Felix didn't give a definite answer, but didn't rule out the possibility of us reuniting. On Tuesday, I asked my husband out for a date at a restaurant, and to my surprise, Felix agreed, boosting my confidence for a positive outcome. We didn't stay at the restaurant for long, choosing a long 4-hour walk in the park. During our time together, we reminisced about our past and our love, smoothly transitioning to discussing our future. I pleaded with my husband to return to the family, and though he didn't say it outright, it was clear he wanted the same. That night, I purposely sent my son to spend the night at a friend's house, freeing the apartment for my beloved to join me. We spent the night together just like in the old days. The next morning, our conversation was brief as we rushed to work. In the evening, as my son and I were having dinner, Felix unexpectedly arrived with his belongings. Words can't express the joy in that moment. And my son was thrilled to see his father. I wonder if Felix has truly forgiven me. My biggest fear is that, after living with me for a while, he might decide he no longer wants this family. But I love him deeply and I know I betrayed him. I'm willing to do anything to make amends. Since his return, my husband hasn't brought up the issue of paternity. And though he acknowledges what happened, he doesn't show anger or negativity toward me. Crucially, his relationship with Tom remains unaffected, which was a major concern for me. Last night we talked about our son's future, and we both agreed that he would likely move out in a few years. Felix expressed his joy at being a father, and it got us thinking about having another child. I plan to see a doctor soon, and my husband was genuinely excited about the idea. It's been over a month since my last message. I've started treatment, and my beloved has been supportive throughout. Not dwelling on the past according to the doctors, I have a good chance of conceiving and having a child. After the treatment, the process is expensive and time-consuming, but my husband and I are ready to face any challenges. For our happiness in retrospect, I recognize the enormity of my mistake, but time cannot be rewound. I must take responsibility and live with the consequences of my actions. Things have taken a different turn in the family of my child's biological father. Felix and Dima haven't communicated for months, and I thought it was the end of their story. However, I was wrong. Dima's wife found out that he had a child with me, and her pain and frustration are indescribable. She feels the same betrayal my husband experienced a few months ago, betrayed by her beloved husband and her best friend. We had one conversation, if you can call it that, with her yelling, crying, and even slapping me a few times. Since then we haven't spoken, and I haven't attempted to contact her. I understand that she will never forgive me. I had hoped she would come to her senses and give her husband another chance. However, last week, she filed for divorce and kicked Dima out of the house. What pains me the most in this story are their two young daughters, aged 12 and 5, and now their family is shattered because of my fault. My mistakes, 6 people have suffered because of me. My beloved husband, who dedicated his whole life to his family. My son, who will never know that his beloved father, whom he idolizes, is not his biological father. My best friend, who lost her marriage because of me, and is now left alone with 2 children. Her 2 little daughters, who lost their favorite daddy. And Dima himself, he lost the most in the story. A friend with whom they had been inseparable for more than 15 years. His wife, who now doesn't want to see him. His daughters, whom Nasty doesn't even allow to talk to their father, and convinces them that he is a traitor. His apartment, which he worked hard for, and which will now be taken by his ex-wife. All this suffering, all this pain. It's all my fault. I don't know if I have the right to have children at all. Why did my lover forgive me? Why, if I were in his shoes, I wouldn't even look at me. I started therapy so we could have a child of our own, but it didn't work out in the end. We decided it's not worth it. These treatments are costly and unlikely to succeed. My husband initially reacted normally, or so it seemed, but later I realized how much pain he was in. The worst thing happened at the end of the summer. It was exactly what I had feared. Our son discovered the truth. A day I'll never forget. I wish I could forget, but I can't. I genuinely believed I could shield my child from the consequences of my wrongdoing. I hoped and prayed, but it was all in vain. When Tom learned the truth, something within him broke. He transformed from a sweet, kind boy, dearly loved and caring towards his family, into a different person within days. For nearly 4 months now, we've been living through a nightmare. My son has started drinking, smoking, staying out late at night, and we have no idea where he goes the rest of the time. He's made some unsettling friends, and just the sight of them gives me the creeps. Rough-looking kids, with a bad reputation throughout the neighborhood. The police know me well, but they've done nothing. It's a family issue. Deal with it. We've got more important matters to attend to. That's all we hear. My son also hates Felix now, even though they were close before. What did he say to his father? I understand that he's just a child, suffering due to my mistakes, but my husband didn't deserve this. He endured so much when the truth about Tom came out, and then we had to give up having a child of our own. And now this living hell. A month ago, Felix started experiencing heart problems. He was hospitalized with symptoms resembling a heart attack. Thankfully, it wasn't a heart attack, but he's on medication and might need surgery down the road. The doctors have warned him to avoid stress, but my son seizes every opportunity to provoke him. I try to intervene, but my husband sees me as being helpless. I witness his pain and resentment daily. He spends days in bed in silence. I've told him that depression could break his heart, but he doesn't listen. We're only 39 years old. Yet in this time he's aged, visibly looking 50 and constantly appearing sad. I have developed wrinkles and deep bags under my eyes. I'm living in a hell of my own making. Every day I berate myself for my mistake, my betrayal, and pray for peace and harmony in our family. But I no longer believe in that. Not in God, not in a happy ending for us. Now I realize how foolish I was to think I could escape the consequences of my actions. I carry the weight of ruining the lives of 6 people, and it's a heavy burden on my conscience. Dima, on the other hand, has it even worse. Nasty divorced him and took him to court over their property, leaving him homeless. She spiraled into a life of partying, drinking and changing partners weekly, unable to recover from the betrayal of her husband. And me, her best friend, almost like a sister. I've tried to talk to her several times, but she becomes hysterical upon seeing me, leading to heated arguments. She's always been morally weak, and I shattered her. Their daughters now live with Nasty in a 1-room apartment to avoid her different partners. I haven't heard from Dima for 6 months. Since their divorce, total silence. December 31st should be a time of happiness, joy and celebration, but not for me. My husband went to visit his parents in another city. And as for Tom, I have no idea where he is. He doesn't answer his phone. I've lost all my friends. Our family has been shunned since everything came to light, and it feels as if we're treated like outcasts. I sit at the table with a bottle crying. Not out of joy, but out of loneliness. This story took place last year, when my husband and I were on vacation in Croatia. On the first day at lunch, we met a married couple, but their origin isn't that important. They had been there for 2 days already, making them experienced compared to us. Ron and Molly were passionate about scuba diving. Just like my husband Stephen, we spent most of our time together, sharing meals diving, shopping and attending various evening events. The only time we didn't meet was at breakfast, because Molly was a late riser, and I didn't mind spending the morning on my own. But as I tend to get bored quickly, I'd head to the beach in the morning, or later in the evening when it was cooler. During breakfast we sat with different neighbors, usually 2 younger guys, although I hadn't paid much attention to them. One spoke English well with a slight accent, while the other remained quiet and smiled. I pondered for a while about their origin, considering various possibilities, but eventually settling on them being Swedes or Germans. I was curious to see if I was right, but it felt somewhat awkward to ask. Our interactions were limited to exchanging greetings and wishing each other a good meal. We followed a routine during our vacation, one that we hardly deviated from. In the mornings Molly and Ron would head to the beach. Later, when it got hot, we'd either return to our rooms or explore the city. Once the weather cooled down, diving was part of the plan, then back to the beach until almost sunset, and finally visiting a bar or cafe for some dancing in the evenings. In contrast to them, I didn't take up scuba diving. Despite my husband's attempts to get me interested, I had a fear of diving to significant depths, where panic would set in, and I worried about running out of air. I couldn't conquer this fear, and my husband eventually went diving without me. Instead, I'd stay on the boat, swim around it or sunbathe on the deck. After a few days of this, I got tired and began spending time at the hotel pool, swimming or relaxing by the poolside, with magazines as my companions. One day I was at the pool, either refreshing myself or reading a magazine, when suddenly right by my ear, a voice greeted me with good afternoon. Even though it wasn't spoken loudly, I was startled and the magazine slipped from my hands. I instantly recognized the voice, with its distinctive accent. Hard to forget turning towards the voice. I saw my breakfast neighbor standing there with a smile. However, my disapproving expression wiped the smile from his face, and he began apologizing, explaining that he didn't mean to startle me, and asking for forgiveness. I remained silent and resumed reading my magazine, though my heart was still racing from the scare. He apologized once more and walked away. After a few minutes I managed to calm down. Unexpectedly he returned, offering another apology, and explaining that he didn't intend to frighten me. He asked if he could buy me a drink, and despite my initial hesitation, I accepted the glass of wine he offered. It was cool and tasted good. He continued apologizing, and then started a conversation. I learned more about him. His name was Troy. He was German and his parents had lived on the island in the past, before relocating to Germany in the 90s. He was on vacation with his friend Kurt, who understood a little English but didn't speak it. Our conversation flowed naturally, and I began to feel sorry for him. The following day he returned, and by the third day, I found myself eagerly looking forward to his presence. He became a regular visitor, and we developed a strong connection. Our conversations spanned various topics, with no topics off limits. We simply enjoyed our relaxed and pleasant discussions. Our stay at the resort continued, and we grew accustomed to each other's company. I valued our interactions, and he left a positive impression on me. And over time I even started to like him. Our discussions covered a wide range of subjects, and there seemed to be no subjects we couldn't explore. It felt effortless and enjoyable. As our vacation progressed, we crossed the equator and it was on Molly's birthday that our vacation routine shifted. On that day Stephen and I, along with Ron and Molly, spent half the day searching for a birthday gift. In the evening they invited us to a cafe for a light dinner and dancing. The husbands enjoyed whiskey, while Molly and I indulged in the local red wine, which was light and delightful to the taste, and surprisingly easy to drink. The wine had little to no taste, and we both had a fair amount. My head felt light, and I didn't even notice the intoxication. Molly and I had a wonderful time on the dance floor, while Stephen and Ron took a break, and sat at the table engrossed in their conversation. Molly and I would occasionally return to the table, to catch our breath and quench our thirst. The atmosphere was delightful. The drink I had consumed was starting to take its effect. While we were at the table, I spotted Troy near the bar. He noticed me and waved. I mechanically waved back, and to my surprise he made his way towards us. Troy asked my husband, "May I invite your wife to dance?" Stephen momentarily turned his attention away from his conversation with Ron, and nodded in agreement. We started with a couple of quick dances, followed by a slow one. Troy put his arm around my waist, and I wrapped my arms around his shoulders, swaying together to the music. He whispered in my ear, and I let out a chuckle when the music ended. We returned to our table surprisingly. Molly also seemed tired of the men's conversation, so she invited Troy to join us. To my amazement, he accepted the invitation. Upon discovering that it was Troy's birthday, he raised a toast to the birthday girl. After a while, the three of us, Molly, Troy and I, headed back to the dance floor. When the music slowed down, Troy asked me to dance once more. After the dance we returned to our table, had more drinks, took a short break, and I suggested that we all go dancing. Both Stephen and Ron declined, and so did Molly. Troy and I returned to the dance floor, and when it was a slow dance, his hand glided gently on my hips as we swayed. "Troy," I said. "What?" He pretended not to understand. "Your hand." I replied, "Sorry." He excused himself. "It's kind of automatic." After a while it happened again. And though he once more naively excused himself, it somehow continued to happen. He did it on purpose, then his hand went down again. Again and again I stopped telling him. And even though his touch was pleasing to me, I just began to return his hand to my waist myself. At the next slow dance it was all over again. And at some point I got tired of taking his hand away. I just stopped paying attention. It was dimly lit on the dance floor, and no one was paying attention to us, and it was a long way to our table, with other dancers blocking the view. He began lightly caressing me. His touch felt nice, but there was still a limit. Troy, come on. Are you uncomfortable? His question just stunned me. I thought he was going to make excuses, and I couldn't even find a way to answer him. He pulled me closer and began whispering in my ear. You're so beautiful, I like you so much when I saw you. The compliments just kept coming. His words were incoherent but exciting. My mind was a whirlwind, a mix of his words, the drinks and the haze in my head. Stop it please. The compliments kept flowing. Suddenly he stopped talking and started kissing me. My ear, my hair, my neck. A pleasant shiver ran through my body. And then I felt his actions become more active. God, what is he doing? Has he gone crazy? Stop it. I wasn't asking him, I was begging him, don't. I was trembling with desire or fear or both. He took my arm and pulled me with him. I followed him as if I were in a trance. Like I was in a fog. He was practically dragging me somewhere. Finally we stopped. My back pressed against something, and he started kissing me again. I couldn't comprehend where I was or who I was with. The kisses covered my face, my hair, my neck. I was shivering all over. He found my lips and kissed them deeply. My skin was covered in goosebumps and my desire grew. Troy's kiss stopped, and I could feel the warmth of his face, and the unevenness of his breaths. Shivers ran through me and the surroundings seemed hazy, as I drifted into a mental fog. We navigated through some bushes and entered an alley. The cafe was just a few steps away, and my anticipation was building. Everything had unfolded beyond the cafe's walls, and we could have been seen. This thought sent a thrill through me, alternating between warmth and a shiver down my spine. Within minutes, we reached the entrance to the dance floor of the cafe. Leaning in, Troy whispered, "You're amazing when my husband falls asleep." Come over, and handed me his number. Still in a daze, I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, trying to regain my composure. The cool water brought me back to reality. I realized that I was a married woman, who had just betrayed her husband, with a complete stranger, returning to my husband and friends. A creeping fear intensified with every step. I felt a chill inside, my cheeks flushed, and it seemed as if I no longer had control over myself. Surprisingly, no one questioned my absence. I slumped into my chair and poured a full glass of wine. I sipped it slowly, attempting to hide any signs of what had occurred. Despite my efforts, Stephen noticed my detachment and asked, "Katie, are you okay?" I nodded silently. "Should we go home?" I nodded again. I was in a strange state of turmoil. On one hand, everything that had transpired thrilled me, but at the same time I couldn't relax, fearing that we might be discovered. Stephen was unsteady on his feet, having had his share of drinks during the evening. That didn't concern me at all. I was looking forward to the night ahead, hoping I wouldn't have to go through such encounters with strangers in my life again.